this juncture, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we'll move straight to the keynote presentation, which is on the topic African Universities as Development Agents. And this will be delivered by the AAU Secretary General, Professor Olusola Oyewale. Just to go through the bio of Prof so that we know who he is. Prof is actually not a new person to us. We are all very much familiar with Professor Olusola. I'll quickly go through his profile. Professor is currently the Secretary General of the Association of African Universities. He is a former Vice Chancellor of the Federal University of Agriculture, Abeokuta, in Nigeria. Professor Oyewale is a professor of food science and technology. He happens to be a former president of the AAU. Prof is also a former staff of the AAU and again, a former staff of the African Union Commission. He has published several scholarly, peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, books, conference, and technical papers. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Obafemi Awolowo University and a Master of Science degree from the University of Ibadan, as well as a doctorate degree in food science and technology, also from the University of Ibadan. Without further ado, would like to invite Prof for his delivery. If we are ready, over to you, Prof.
I bring you greetings from the headquarters of the Association of African Universities in Accra, Ghana. I am Professor Olusola Oyewale, the Secretary General of the Association of African Universities. Let me congratulate all universities in Africa as we celebrate this year's Africa's Universities Day. In the course of this celebration, we've decided to align with the celebration of the African Union Commission, where this year has been designated as the Year of Education. In my presentation this morning, I'll be focusing on the theme of the Africa's Year of Education, which is also the theme that we have agreed to use for the Africa Universities Week. So today, I will be speaking on Educate an African Fit for the 21st century. My intention is to discuss on how we can build resilient education system so that we can have increased access to inclusive, lifelong, quality, and relevant learning in the African continent. In the course of this presentation, I will be starting with a focus on Africa, and I will be developing on the state of education, the state of our universities, and the state of our youth in Africa. And I hope to also look at the skills and competencies that should be possessed by the African graduates that will be fit for the 21st century. Finally, I want to share with us on what we need to do in order to build that graduate that will be fit for the 21st century in the African continent. I will be starting with a focus on our continent, Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, many countries, particularly those in sub-Saharan Africa, continue to face challenges related to poverty, inequality, health, and access to essential services like electricity and education. Africa today is said to be a continent being challenged with poverty. In 2024, for example, around 429 million people in Africa were living in extreme poverty, in that they cannot afford $2.15 per day for their sustenance. This ought not to be. The average life expectancy at birth across Africa has been found to be 61 years for men and 65 years for women. This is not comparable to the 70 years for men and 75 years for women globally. Today in Africa, over 300 million people do not have access to clean water. In Africa today, over 1/3 of the population is malnourished, and less than half of the population have access to doctors or hospitals. I know that Africa is a country that is highly endowed naturally, but despite our natural endowment, Africa is still poor. We do little with manufacturing, and in fact, what we do in Africa is to sell our raw materials to the industrialized world that sell it back to Africa. We need to change this trend. Ladies and gentlemen, most African countries today have been said to be worse off in this year than they were in 1960, when many of them started getting independent. We need to change this trend. Many African countries still lack crucial infrastructures such as roads, airports, railroads, and ports. And then, access to computers or ability to use computers is not what it should be yet in the African continent. What of the healthcare in Africa? Epidemic diseases are killing African people in a very huge number. Unfortunately, funding for health research and funding for health facilities by governments is rather low in many countries in Africa. Mosquito, through malaria, still kill a large number of people in the African continent. Our people are still suffering from cholera, and cases of AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, is still growing within the African continent. These are things that we need to arrest in our continent. Ladies and gentlemen, maternal mortality rate is still not encouraging in the African continent. This is the number of maternal deaths per 100,000 live births in our continent. For example, for South Sudan, we still have recorded about 1,150 deaths per 100,000 live births. For Sierra Leone, it's about 1,120. For Chad, it's about 1,140. But I'm glad to note that some countries are still doing well. Countries like Tunisia, with just 46 deaths per 100,000 live births, Egypt, 37, Mauritius, 53. What can we do to help us to have lower maternal mortality rates in the African continent? This is the part of the challenges that we need to address as the people of Africa. What of infant mortality rate? This is the number of infant deaths under 1 year of age per 1,000 live births. The figures is still high in Africa, with 84 births per 1,000 deaths recorded for Central Africa. And for Somalia, for example, it's about 78. Nigeria is about 69. But good enough. There are still some countries with low infant mortality rates in Africa. Countries like Tunisia, Egypt, Algeria, and even South Africa. I hope that as Africans, let us see what we can do to improve the health of our people. A very important concern to those of us in Africa is our access to electricity. And it's been found that some countries are good. They have good access to electricity. Countries like Egypt, Tunisia, South Africa, Algeria. But, ladies and gentlemen, there are countries like Chad with just 11% of the population having access to electricity. What of South Sudan? Just 7%. Burkina Faso, 18%. We need to make a change on this. I'm glad to know that one area where Africa has recorded a good report is in terms of internet penetration, which has been found to be from between 60 to even 90 in African countries, due to the large interest of our young people in internet facilities. Let's now leave that and look at the state of education in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa's gross enrollment in tertiary education is still rather low, just about 13, compared to about 70% in USA. Higher education in Africa is still fashioned after our colonial legacies. Many years after independence, learning and teaching in many African countries is still teacher-centered, and we have infrastructure deficiencies in many of our schools. Ladies and gentlemen, our educational system is still bedeviled with high cost of energy, high cost of data, which is also limiting our ability to access the benefits of internet in many African countries. Looking at the state of education in Africa, skill and competencies of our learners are still rather low. In Africa today, our uptake of research outputs is also low. Many countries and governments in Africa appear to be operating as if they do not need their universities or they do not need their research to be able to operate. I should also say this, which is of much concern to me: the low collaboration between universities and industry in Africa. And it has been difficult for universities in Africa to do research relevant to the needs of our industries. Let me briefly share with you the state of universities in Africa. Number one, massification is still high. We have a large number of learners which cannot be accommodated by the available infrastructures. Funding is still a challenge. Infrastructure, our research output is still low. Our curriculum appears not to be producing graduates that are employable. Today, the global ranking and reputation of many of our higher education institutions is not what it should be. We are still struggling with quality and governance in many African universities. There is the problem of university autonomy. And then many of our universities are yet technologically integrated, and digital transformation of our education system has been found to be low. You may be wondering why this should be so. Our higher education system is today being confronted by many challenges. What are the challenges facing higher education in Africa? Number one is access. Despite the fact I've told that we've got increased number of universities, our young people, many of our young people can still not be able to access our universities. Many students from rural areas or marginalized communities are facing challenges in gaining admission. Probably they cannot even afford it. Today, we have limited access to schools and educational infrastructures, especially in our rural areas. Go to many of our institutions, overcrowded classrooms with limited teaching facilities, non-availability of qualified educators. These are the things affecting our education system. We still have low access for girls. We still have low access for people with disabilities, and also for people from marginalized communities. We need to change this. Another major challenge facing higher education in Africa is the challenge of quality. Quality refers to an education system that ensures that all learners acquire the knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes necessary to live fulfilling lives that will contribute to the society and adapt to the changing needs of our world. Ladies and gentlemen, some of the key components that we require for quality education in Africa is still lacking. These include qualified teachers, safe and inclusive learning environment, appropriate student engagement, and access to resources for quality education. We still have challenges with all this. The third challenge that is facing many of our higher education systems today is that of inadequate infrastructure and resources. Many institutions still lack physical materials for both the learners and the students. You'll be surprised that there are people in some marginalized communities where the learners do not have access to book, paper, laboratories, even light. We do not have enough classrooms, and the insufficient resources that we need to meet adequate learning is still there facing many of us. And when you look at all these things, the quality of education suffers as a result, with insufficient faculty to student ratios and our facilities being overburdened. Ladies and gentlemen, the fourth major challenge facing higher education in Africa is that of irrelevant curricula. Looking at the curricula of many of our institutions today is still a mixture of colonial models with some nationalistic inputs. Today, the curricula of many universities cannot input in our learners the required skills and competencies that are needed for today. Indeed, universities in Africa will need to review their curricula in order to be able to produce the graduates fit for the 21st century. I am also aware that an important challenge that is facing many universities in Africa is that of staffing. In many institutions, we have faculty shortages, and many of our professors and lecturers are poorly paid, and they've not been able to put in their best. There's a challenge of flight of qualified manpower in Africa today, because many of our professors are leaving the continent for other countries where they are better appreciated. There's a lack of incentives for high academic and research performance in the continent, and this is affecting the research outputs of many of our lecturers. I've mentioned earlier on the problem of massification, where the students have overwhelmed the available infrastructures in many universities. In fact, the quality of education often suffers as a result with insufficient faculty to student ratios and our facilities being overburdened. I know that many of you listening to me today know that African universities are not having the required funding for their research efforts. It's so unfortunate that most of the research funding in African universities today come from international sources. The domestic research budgets are very low. As a result, African universities still continue to do researches that are not relevant directly to Africa's development. Ladies and gentlemen, another important challenge facing universities in Africa is that of governance and management. We are having weak governance structure. Academic freedom is not being allowed in many institutions, and unfortunately, corruption, lack of integrity in financial management in our institutions is still a big challenge for many institutions. Our universities continue to face challenges connected with low technological integration. We are still divided digitally. E-learning infrastructure in Africa is still low. I will also mention that many of our universities are still weak in internationalizing, to the extent that our ability to globally compete with other institutions beyond Africa is not encouraging. Africa today is still struggling with barriers connected with language and culture. These are the issues that we need to directly confront in Africa if we want to build the graduates that are fit for the 21st century. Many countries in Africa still need to deal with political instability and conflicts that are disrupting learning in their various countries. In Africa today, our young people still face challenges with having required support for their learning, and then ability of our countries to support our young people, support our universities to meet up with digital developments in the world is still rather poor. I will say conclusively that regional disintegration in Africa is still high. There is poor collaboration and partnership among our institutions, to the extent that we are still divided based on our colonial past. This should not be, because for us to develop in Africa, education is very important. Education is important because it serves as a powerful driver of economic growth, social progress, and political stability in the continent. Let me share with us the thoughts of two great Africans on the issue of education. The first person is Nelson Mandela, and I quote him. He said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world," unquote. Another great African that spoke about the importance of education happened to be Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, who said the universities must become a primary tool for Africa's development in the new century. Universities can help to develop Africa's expertise. They can enhance the analysis of Africa's problem, and they can strengthen domestic institutions, serve as a model of environment for the practice of good governance, unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, for Africa to develop, education is very important. What are the importance of education to African development? Number one, education promotes economic growth and helps in reducing poverty. When you look at education, it's the means by which we develop our human capital. It is the means by which we empower our people to earn more than they earned before. It's the means by which we create jobs. Number two importance of education is that education helps us to improve our health outcomes. For example, I've told you about the challenge of reducing child mortality in Africa. It's been found out that educated mothers are more likely to seek medical care during pregnancy and for their children, leading to reduction in infant and child mortality rates. Education is also very important in reducing some diseases prevalent in Africa. For example, education plays a critical role in increasing awareness about health issues such as HIV/AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. Informed individuals are better equipped to prevent, manage, and mitigate the impact of diseases in their various communities. What of sanitation and nutrition? Educated populations are more likely to adapt to better sanitation practices, leading to improved health environment. Ladies and gentlemen, education also promotes social development, gender equality within our environment. We need education to empower our women and girls. Education is one of the most effective ways to empower our women and girls in Africa. When our girls receive quality education, they are more likely to delay marriage, have fewer children, and take part in economic and political decision making. Education will help us to reduce this big problem in Africa, the problem of gender inequality and social incohesion. What of political instability in Africa? It has been found out that education can help us to reduce the problem of political instability within our continent. We need to produce informed citizens, and this can be done through education. We need to reduce conflicts among our people, and we also need to develop leaders that can help to produce good governance for our continent. Number 5, education promotes technological advancement and innovation. Issues about innovation and research is very critical. We are having the emergence of new technologies, and this can only be uptaken when our people are properly educated. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to promote education in our country because it will help us to reduce inequality, regional and social inequality in our continent. Education will help us to break the cycle of poverty that is prevalent in many environments. Today, in the world, we are talking about environmental sustainability. Education is very essential to promote environmental sustainability. Without education, it will be difficult for us to develop a green economy for our people. Education is also important to preserve our culture and to promote growth within the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I want to talk about the youth in Africa. When we talk about building an African fit for the 21st century, I think we are concerned about our young people. What is the state of the youth in Africa today? Ladies and gentlemen, Africa is said to be a continent that is home to a large population of young people. 20% of Africa's population is between the ages of 15 and 24. In fact, it has been said that Africa has the youngest population in the world, with the median age of 19.7. By 2015, it is speculated that the population of Africa today will have increased by 50%. So what we are saying is that Africa is home to the youngest population globally, with over 60% of our population under the age of 25. So if we are talking about developing the African continent, if we are talking about building the Africa fit for the 21st century, I think we should be concerned about the youth of Africa. As I've said earlier on, Africa is home to the youngest population globally, with over 60% of our population under the age of 25. By 2050, it is projected that African youth will constitute almost a quarter of the world's young people. This continent, Africa, is expected to add about 1 billion people to the world population by 2050. Most of them are young people. Ladies and gentlemen, today, the situation of our youth need to be changed. 40% of African youths are unemployed. 60% of African youths still live on less than $2 per day. 30% of African youths have no access to education. And 70% of the youths of Africa, they live in the rural areas where development has not reached. And that is why I need to mention that our universities have important roles to play at this stage of Africa's development. Today, many of our young people are still being marginalized or excluded from political activities. Youth unemployment is very high because of the skill gaps that have been found among our young people. And African young people are migrating out of our continent in a very large number, more than ever before. This should not be. Ladies and gentlemen, the large population of young people in Africa, if well managed, can empower development in the African continent. Ladies and gentlemen, our young people are highly energetic. Our young people are highly innovative. Many of our young people can help us in developing new entrepreneurs in our continent, to the extent that when we talk about the economic transformation of Africa, let us know that we have a big potential in our young people if well developed. And that is the reason why we need to empower our young people with the skills and competencies that they need in order to be fit for the 21st century. Ladies and gentlemen, for us to be able to talk on how to educate an African fit for the 21st century, it will be very important for us to consider the skills and competencies that should be possessed by the African graduates that will be fit for the 21st century. What are these skills? Number one is critical thinking and problem solving. Our learners should be empowered to think critically. They should be empowered to be able to be innovative in order to solve problems. Number two skill that our learners should possess is digital literacy and technological competencies. They need to have basic digital skills. They also need to have advanced digital competencies, and they should be able to connect to e-learning and collaborate remotely with others beyond their own geographical areas. The third important skill that I think that the graduate that be fit for this 21st century should possess is effective communication, both verbal and written communication. Our graduates should be able to express the ideas that they have. They should be able to present their information to an audience. They should be able to engage in meaningful conversation across diverse audiences. The number four skill that our graduates and learners should possess is that of relationship. Relationship is very important today than ever before. Beyond formal communication, graduates need strong interpersonal skills to navigate different social and professional contexts. This includes ability to listen actively, ability to negotiate, ability to resolve conflicts, and ability to relate with people, even outside their own cultures. Relationship is very important, and I hope that our young people and learners will look for these skills. Number five skill that our young people need to possess to be fit for the 21st century is emotional intelligence. By this, I mean the ability to be aware of themselves, aware of the concerns and needs of other people, ability to show empathy to the needs of others and be relevant to their communities. Number six skill that our young people should aim for is that of leadership and ability to work in a team. Young people today should be able to collaborate with others no matter who they are in their group. The next skill that our young people need to possess today more than ever before is entrepreneurship and innovation. More than ever before, we need to create new jobs. More than ever before, our young people should not look into the civil service as a place to go after graduation. They should develop some business acumen for them to be able to create money and use money adequately. The eighth skill that I feel that our young people need to have is that of ethical and responsible decision making. They need to take decisions with integrity and with accountability. They need to be able to operate with ethical judgment. The next skill that our young people need to possess today is technical and vocational skills. The world we are living in now has on technical expertise, craftsmanship, and trade skills. They are selling more than ever before. And our young people should ensure that apart from having their degrees, they have some technical skills that they can revert to. Number 10 skill that I feel that our young people should connect to is the skill of being resilient and having good mental awareness. I know that the times we are going through may be hard, but they need to have some ability to cope with the challenges of this time. Ladies and gentlemen, we are looking for young people with research and analytical skills. Today, we are in a world where policies should be taken based on data. So we have to have our young people and learners who have data literacy, and learners who have research competencies. Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, we need young people who can be socially engaged and socially responsible to the needs of this time. If I have to summarize all that I've said so far, ladies and gentlemen, we need the African graduates that will fit for the 21st century. Graduates that possess the skills that are relevant for this time, graduates that are digitally literate, graduates that are knowledgeable, graduates that are entrepreneurial, and graduates that can help to solve the problems facing our continent at this particular time. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, what are the strategies that we need to put in place for building the graduates that fit for the 21st century? Firstly, number one, our universities need to change or revise their curricula. They need to mount courses with learning outcomes that can help our young people to possess the skills and competencies that I've shared with you before now. Our curricula needs to be revised to meet the needs of our market and the needs of the industry. In fact, I should say this, that our universities, apart from mounting degree programs, they should also mount micro-credentials where our young people can come for a very short time to acquire some skills that can help them. The second thing that we need to do in order to develop the graduates fit for the 21st century is that our university should change their methods of teaching and learning. For so many years, our teaching and learning has been teacher-centered to the extent that we've not been able to evolve the innovation inherent in our learners. Let our teaching and learning process become learner-centered. Let us also promote self-learning. Let us empower digitalization and technology in the delivery of our learning processes. Ladies and gentlemen, to build the African fit for the 21st century, we need to reduce our focus on certificates and place more emphasis on skills. That is the reason why our universities, our higher education institutions should ensure that for every course that they take, definite learning outcomes with defined skills and competencies are emphasized. Our continent Africa should promote technical and vocational education, and as I mentioned earlier on, micro credentials focus on skill acquisition should be promoted. For us to promote the graduates fit for the 21st century, we need to have learners who will not stop learning just after they leave school. In fact, today we need to promote lifelong learning to meet the evolving knowledge that is changing every time. So, ladies and gentlemen, every one of us should be ready to access knowledge anytime, anywhere, and at any age. Number 5 thing that we need to do to build up the Africa needed to fit to the needs of the 21st century is that we need to promote collaboration and partnership among ourselves, among universities in Africa. We also need to collaborate with universities outside Africa. In fact, the trend is that let us promote South-South-North collaboration. Let us build innovation centers in our institutions. It's high time that every university should have entrepreneurial incubators. This will help us to build the graduates needed for the 21st century. In concluding, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm saying is this: we can build the graduates fit for the 21st century, but universities and institutions in Africa need to revise and decolonize our curricula. Let us promote micro-credentials for skill acquisition. Let us promote lifelong learning. Let our institutions collaborate with the industry in developing the curricula that will fit the needs of our industries. And lastly, ladies and gentlemen, for us to build the African fit for the 21st century, let the governments of Africa increase their investment in education, because without education, development will be difficult. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Olusola Oyewale, for that very high level and powerful keynote address. There were a lot of issues that had been raised in that address, and I'm sure we all have a lot of questions to ask following Prof's presentation. I would really encourage all of us to use the Q&A button to start posting our questions, so that when we get to that point, we can read it out and we can also give ourselves